Hello and welcome into Rushing the Field. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. We talk about college football from a national standpoint every single week. If you like us, please subscribe, rate, and review us. In Joshua, there is no better place to start than with actual breaking news that is breaking as we are starting to record this, which is that the Pac-12 is no longer going to be just the Pac-2. They have added 4 schools for 2026. They're raiding the Mountain West. They are adding Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Colorado State. So, Joshua, this brings them up to 6. They eventually need to get up to 8 by 2026, but big moves from the Pac-12.
This is huge, right? We got a 6-pack of schools now, which is important. They got to get up to 8, though, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I actually think that, you start to look at the quality of this and say this can be competitive here. We saw what Boise State did last week against Oregon. They've been a team that's been prominent over a couple of decades as one of the smaller schools in college football, so you certainly love that. Colorado State certainly has a ways to go. I think that they can capitalize off of momentum, though. If they get to an expanded conference, it's going to have some more eyeballs and a little bit more pull. And the Colorado population just as a whole is blowing up, and I kind of look at that as maybe the high school quality gets better, the in-state recruiting can be better for the Colorado schools. San Diego State, again, has played good ball. And then we see Fresno State as one of those teams that's really competitive too. So I think this is actually a great place to start. It's also really interesting. You got all the state schools that are in the Pac-12 now. So maybe as they look to add to get to at least 8, they start to find the trend there as well.
Yeah, it is easy to remember. Every single school has state in their name. So that is easy to remember with the new 6. It's also a couple other details worth pointing out. So they will join July 1st, 2026. This was just announced by the league and by all the schools. So all the applications have been approved. This is how it's going to work. And that the 6 of these schools are going to figure out those final 2 or more members together. There's no real rush on that now that they have the 6. It is going to cost, Joshua, $110 million for these schools to get out of the Mountain West and for the Pac-12 to pay the Mountain West. Because if you remember, they had this agreement, a scheduling agreement for 1 year. It had all sorts of financial penalties to try to avoid, honestly, this exact situation from happening. It would have been a lot cheaper if the Pac-12 just absorbed the entire Mountain West. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to add the 4 most valuable schools and then decide on the rest later. If they want to add a UNLV or Air Force or somebody else later, of course they're going to want to come because clearly this is the league that you want to be in. This is going to be a lot more valuable than the Mountain West. So the Pac-12 has been hoarding its resources. Mm-hmm. It has, its war chest from settlement with the outgoing 10 schools, contracts like the Rose Bowl, the CFP. Teresa Gould fought for more money in the new expanded CFP deal. So there were a lot of reasons why the Pac-12 was trying to see how valuable it was, how much money it had. And one of those things was to potentially be able to pay for something like this.
Yeah, and it was really smart. And I know that there were a lot of jokes made about the Pac-2 throughout the offseason and kind of getting left behind. But the idea that they were able to stack resources and have a war chest available for this exact thing is big. And to your point, it makes sense to not absorb all of those teams, right? Like you're trying to build the highest quality conference because you want to be able to go to networks and say on a game-by-game basis, we're actually going to have a product that people are going to want to watch week in and week out. They're not going to be a bunch of duds that you have to consume just to get some of the top matchups through the conference. So I think it's really good. And now to your point, they're going to be in a choosing scenario moving forward for those last couple of schools, which I think really sets up for them.
Where would you go? Would you go with other Mountain West schools, or would you maybe go for take shots at the AAC? You could go for a UTSA or North Texas, Tulane. You could go for Memphis. How would you approach this if you're trying to fill those last spots?
No, I think going for some of the AAC schools would be a really good move. You mentioned UTSA. I think they would be a really good one. I think the arrow's pointing up on them.
Yes.
Same thing like Tulane and Memphis have been schools that have done a really good job there. North Texas is a school that's made some noise in the last couple of years. I think those would all be great moves. I think UNLV is one that makes a ton of sense there. And again, just kind of looking at, demographics, population shifts, et cetera, people like Nevada because of the low taxes. And so I think the high school football there, you've got Gorman, and a lot of those guys are national recruits, but you start to look at the quality of high school football and potentially recruiting grounds and building programs. I think that can make sense down the line. The other one that has popped into my head, and just don't know because they just made a move, but like Cal and Stanford, you could stay on the West Coast, it'd be a lot easier travel wise. Like, I know that for those schools, they probably want to be around more prominent brands, and especially for some of the non-revenue sports, I think being in the ACC makes more sense to them. But it's expensive. That is an expensive endeavor that they got into with all the travel that's required. And I think, a hard push at those two schools would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that, you probably are just monitoring because of contractual agreements. I'm sure it would be very difficult for them to get out of the ACC. But listen, part of the Pac-12's, Pac-2's plan here was to wait this out, see what the landscape looks like, see what changes. And it's very possible, maybe even after 1 year, maybe you're hoping that Stanford and Cal realize with their reduced shares in the ACC, all the travel costs, that it's just not worth it. And you want to come home back with two of the members of the Pac-12 that you were just with this more regional league. And we're thinking about a world where, I know we don't talk, in the weeds all the time, but like the house settlement is going to be very expensive. People are going to be spending, they can spend up to $23 million paying players directly year over year. You're going to have to find ways to save money, and regional scheduling is one of the ways to do that. So I actually really like that this is the league right now. Again, you could add Tulane or Memphis, and that kind of throws a little wrench into this, but it does have some, regional ties and relationships and things that make a lot of sense from a college conference standpoint that we honestly don't always see these days because we now have these coast to coast leagues.
I wanted to ask you a question now. If, say Pac-12, they get their 8 teams, will they be a power conference, or would they be like the group of 6 now as the new Pac-12?
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically there's 2 different ways that you would identify a league. So the 8 minimum members is an NCAA thing. So part of what started like power conferences in the first place was NCAA governance reasons, like autonomy. When you hear people talk about that, that's what they're talking about. So the Pac-12 did lose autonomy status and is not being treated as the same as the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and the Pac-12. And then we just went through negotiations for the expanded college football playoff, the new contract that starts in 2026. They are not being treated the same as the big boys. We also know that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be taking more money than even ACC and Big 12. But they're also not in the same category as the group of 5 conferences because, again, they were 2 members. And they were fighting for more because they were originally being treated, more towards like what an independent would, like a UMass, UConn situation. So now maybe you adjust some of that. I mean, I think there is, there's going to be a push for this. But honestly, I think the way that you look at it is like it'd probably be treated similarly to how they are at the Mountain West. Where you're kind of fighting for that group of 5 spot, which I think makes a lot of sense. And obviously they're going to want to push for more respect and more governance power and things like that. But, you can only do what you can do at this point. You're a smaller league and it is predominantly Mountain West teams right now. So we'll have to see. We'll see what they do. But listen, they thought it was really, really important to keep the Pac-12 brand, to keep the assets, but the name, like the respect and all the things that come with that, I think is going to help them as they try to continue to gain respect and not just be considered, a Mountain West like reverse merger. One other thing I'll say, Joshua, because we've got the Apple Cup on Peacock. You've got the Apple Cup this weekend. You've got Oregon State this weekend. I don't think the timing of this announcement is an accident. No. 2 days before you have these games where the entire narrative would have been, oh, poor Oregon State, poor Washington State, left behind by their in-state rivals. And now you have this entirely new narrative of them being aggressive, poaching big brands from the Mountain West. And look at the future is brighter than it's been at any point in the last year.
And I still think going into this weekend, they get to leverage the idea that they were left behind too. So they get the best of both worlds, right? Like there's a reality now that this is a situation that looks more and more viable by the day, which is huge for them. But as their teams prepare to play in these games, they get to be like, oh man, they disrespected us, they don't like us, they left us behind. And frankly, Oregon looks more gettable than you thought that they would. Washington, I think, has played some good ball, but like we're still trying to figure out what their transition from Kalen DeBoer to Jed Fish is, and roster turnover and all that kind of stuff. Like it feels like a little bit of spooky season as we head into these big rivalry games that used to be like the conference matchup, and they're not.
Yeah. And listen, playing a Corvallis is difficult. There is going to be a lot of extra emotion in these games. Like it is a fascinating week to have these matchups so early in the season, but we're going to learn some things. And again, there's this whole different narrative as the backdrop for these games now that the Pac-2 is turning into the six-pack. I would just like to say what I would do is definitely handicap the AAC. That would be my strategy.
Yes.
I would try to, because if you handicap the AAC, this is all about supremacy, conference supremacy. So you want to be the premier group of 5 program. You want to be above everyone else, but you also like, what if the ACC needs to backfill? What if they lose some schools? They're going to be looking at teams like in the AAC. So you're essentially like preemptively guarding against that as well. So that's the strategy I would take. Although again, if Stanford and Cal become available and become interested, like, yes, you reunite, you try to do something like that. But that's what I would do. And so this is going to be really fascinating. They have a lot of time. They just have to do this by July 2026. And again, everyone in the Mountain West is going to want to come. They're all going to be making calls, trying to get into this new Pac-12. But again, I think they're going to have some options, and we'll see what the media value is, who's interested. You've got new players like the CW, like Ion, like TNT Sports getting in the mix already for college football rights. So we'll continue to track on all of that. It was breaking news. This just became official on Thursday morning as we were recording. So we wanted to make sure that we started with that for the ticket stub, which is our point of entry into the pod.